Contrast Security secures the code that global business relies on. It is the industry's most modern and comprehensive code security platform, removing security roadblock inefficiencies and empowering enterprise developers to write and release secure application code faster. The Contrast platform automatically detects vulnerabilities while developers write code, eliminates false positives, and provides how-to-fix guidance for easy and fast vulnerability remediation. Learn more about the Contrast platform at securityweekly.com/contrastsecurity. The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance in audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. Businesses need API protection that goes beyond signature matching and can stay ahead of attackers and their various tactics and tools. They need a solution that is more patient and prepared than a modern attacker and can track their actions over time. ThreatX is the only API attack protection platform that delivers on the promise of stopping API attacks in real time while giving you the visibility you need to prepare for future attacks. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatX. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Tanya Janka about making effective security through good security and the importance of learning how people learn in order to deliver effective training. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella, and it's just about time for the news. First, don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content, just like us talking about 90s music. Screaming Trees, Soul Asylum, those are two more that we should mention in there. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe on any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, a Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. And do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions at securityweekly.com/guests. We review suggestions monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. Mr. Kinsella, this brings us to the first article was, unfortunately, we lost Joe in between the break there, but there is on ESPN2 a financial modeling World Cup that was underway using Microsoft Excel. And I was going to set up, start off my co-hosts with, you need to now implement a Diffie-Hellman key exchange using only Excel. Bonus points if you can make it post-quantum, but we're going to have to push that out for a delay of game, and we'll bring that out maybe next episode. We'll see. But I thought that was just kind of fun, is not anything particularly application security related, unless there's some ideas. What would, besides a CTF, what would an application security competition look like that you would watch?
So I was actually curious about this, and I just so I'm for those listening, I'm just landed and got home, and so I wasn't at Vegas, but I'm still sort of unpacking and catching up on the news. I've actually watched this before. So
wonderful.
I'm guessing it's on either very, very late or very, very early on ESPN because, it sounds great and I'm sure it is, but you can find us on YouTube too. Curiosity killed that cat and I had to go and click around, and I'm here to tell you that it's going to be on either very late or very early on. Well, they say ESPN 8. Is that actually a channel? Because I know of ESPN 2, and if 8 exists, that explains a lot. We all get our kicks, right? As you were just saying, Mike, we talk about AppSec. We had Tanya on here, who's amazing, professional entertainer background, but still, if you put us in front of the right group of football fans, they're going to be like, what is this garbage? Get it off our TV. So we all have our own thing. But yeah, I don't know. I'm still need to catch up on the Vegas stuff too, the Black Hat and the DEF CON from the weekend. So we've probably got a lot of really entertaining TV to be watching over the coming weeks.
Indeed. Yeah, I've got two Black Hat references coming up, but let's build up to them because I think we've got at least we've got quite a theme of Microsoft's, riffing on the starting off with Excel. A couple of articles I brought together that I think build into not some Microsoft bashing. We're not in the 90s anymore, but some Microsoft learning, some education, if you will. One was just a dog walk 0-day vulnerability that's been exploited. This was essentially the story behind this. It was a vulnerability that was first disclosed to them in 2019, I believe, and then in the bug bounty triage, which is not uncommon, was a reaction of, well, this isn't bypassing a security boundary. Are you basically just telling us that someone has to download and execute a file, and then that file will execute arbitrary code within the privileges of their account? And these are reasonable reactions to bug bounty submissions and reasonable discussions to have. But one of the good things, I think, is that as we learn, as we understand more nuances of attacks, as well as attacks get improved and more popularized, the risk elevates, and now Microsoft fixed this. So this was more just an example of a handling bug bounties, which is one of the reasons I picked it up to build up to. Microsoft also was showing off in the last 12 months. So last June 2021 through this July, spent a whopping $14 million in bug bounty rewards. So this goes into yet another one of those marketing style articles that says this is how much money we spent. But 14 million is a lot. One of the questions here, I would say, John, I'm going to give you $13 million because I'm going to skim a little bit off the top for myself, but you've got an annual budget, $13 million. What are you going to do with the development team that you could put together with that and with a focus on security?
That's a good question. Throw a party at Black Hat with 10 million and then 2 million.
There we go.
No, right? And it's I've got Tanya on the brain after the last half hour. So, we've got more and more free resources for people to be able to learn and educate and improve. I'm going to go out of my way here to avoid the vendor we're talking about. For people can see my Twitter if they care. But I think it's a nice chunk of change. What's catching my eye right now, I'm going to come back to this, but like on the page, actually on the MSRC page, there's a map, grayscale of where the researchers were around the world. A little bit in most US and Asia, a little bit down in South America, tiny bit in Africa. So the first thought in my head, actually Middle East too. The first thought in my head is, as those geographic areas come online over the next, I'll say 3 to 5 years, we're going to start seeing some really interesting stuff. I've worked with some folks in Nigeria. Like one of my co-founders is from South Africa. So that continent we're right on the edge of seeing that just sort of take off. So it's going to be really exciting just as an industry to see some of those people actually come back to and listen to Tanya stuff and things like that. But let's make it a nice round number, 10 million. Don't ask me where the other 2 million went. You can do a lot with that, man. And that's, I'm not going to go there. There's a lot you can do with that. And, depending, no matter how big your, how many lines of code you have underneath your purview, I think all of us at some point, preferably more often, not less, need to take that step back and go, what would I do with it? It's good that this money is being put in this example into bug bounties, and Google and the other guys are doing it too. But at the same time, it's like, okay, is there something we should be doing? I'll say that's non-technical in my organization. Do I mentor my leaders better? Do we have better lines of communication? Do we not let things sit around for 2 years? And this, by the way, also this particular article you have, or sorry, the last article, the dog, whatever it is, dog walk. That's a path traversal also. So I thought of you when I saw it.
Yes.
So, it's there's a lot of things you can do with that money. Take $1 million of it. Take like 2 million and grab the top 10% of leadership in your company, say top 25%, and actually go, hey, we care about this. We're spending $10 million a year on this just alone, even if that's a small percentage. How can we do better things? How do we care more about this? Leave the politicking out of it. If your company has politicking, leave everything out of it. Like, how do we actually make stuff better? So as Tanya was saying, the developers who are sitting in the other side aren't being embarrassed or scared that something like this is going to come out in public. So that's my thought on how to spend 9 million.
Oh, yeah, I like that because you went in definitely a different direction. My brain immediately was going to, speaking of like dog walk, and yes, some directory traversal and PowerShell in there, was going just to the idea of roll out FIDO keys. There's just one thing that there's a cost there, both of the initial hardware as well as ongoing support, but you can get rid of a lot of those phishing attack vectors just using FIDO keys. And then I think the other part of where my brain was going to would be campaigns in the sense of what do we where's our attack surface that we're dealing with? Where is some pain points that that some good developers, 3 to 5 developers, could tiger team to throw out some more hopefully not sounding too cliche, go tackle some sandboxing something, adding a new default configuration that is secure by default. And part of that, my mind was also kind of pulling all these articles together. And another one about Microsoft Edge, which this is part of their super duper security configurations. They have a new security layer where you can basically disable JIT. And this is a way to saying JIT is notorious for being an attack vector for 0 days. We saw this with iOS in lockdown. They also disabling JIT within their Safari, as well as I believe also within iMessage and rendering. So it's the idea of where are some areas that are common attack classes commonly attacked, and what can we do besides just fix a lot of bugs? So again, I think I don't have a very good idea that is focused there, but that's where I would start to think about it. And,
So let's see. I agree with you on that stuff. And that's the end of our recording. That's the show. So, what I didn't put in here into our notes, I don't think you got it either. Brendan Eich from Mozilla, the guy who created JavaScript, I believe he said it did like an hour or two when he was,
right.
bored or something. He actually came out last week or two, I believe, and said that he thinks JavaScript should go away. So put that in here with, as you're saying, around the JIT and some things like this. So, that's good. That's great. I want to go back to the previous thing for another 30 seconds. You were talking about FIDO keys and the technical controls, right, versus the human controls. And I think this article, again, is sort of, let's bring these two together with Microsoft Edge. So, and I'm not talking about a single organization, because I'm seeing this over multiple organizations just in the last week or two. People get in the way, whether it's people are lazy, or as we were saying the last story, that they don't admit that they don't know about something, or God, we've had this vulnerability in our code for 18 months. I hope nobody finds it. And then 4 months later, hello,
somebody finds it.
So there's all these different things that we're just as humans that we're doing that are so dumb. And that includes me. I ain't perfect here, right? But that's it. I think a lot of, if we just spend some of that money, I mean, we need the controls. Let's get rid of the low hanging fruit. We're all going to agree on that. But at the same time, it's like, let's just go for a walk outside and talk about what are we doing and why are we actually doing this, or why do we have some of these things? And that's, like I said, man, I'm seeing this across multiple large organizations out there. There's one organization that they released something in production in the last few weeks that was never QA'd. It's like, what can you do, right? So, and that's not my friends here in Redmond. But that's there's so it's some of the really basic things is we don't always need the complex story. That's all. But so on that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and it bolsters a little bit more, and the light bulb is going off over my head while you were focusing on that budget, that $10 million. I think it was $8 million by now that we're going to spend.
6.
Talking to leadership, talking to the stakeholders, because it sounds like you really want to push on that, instilling the culture, and this is how we care, which is again, hard to put that numeric, that financial value on it, but it leads into that idea of let's actually QA these things. Let's say that yes, people are going to complain about change. Change is bad of any kind, but there are reasons why we do want change, and change doesn't have to be terrible in the sense that security is now friction. And that's possibly one of the things that we didn't go deep enough when we were talking with Tanya about. But even with the idea of, like, I'll riff a little bit on those FIDO keys and saying, it would also be great to have use those keys when you need to access a production system, but also be even better to not have to access a production for humans to access production systems anyway. But the security approach is not to say our new mandate is no humans touch a production system. The approach is, what are your workflows? What are you trying to do? Let's actually invest some time now to make that automated, to make that life easier, rather than just say you can't access it, go figure it out on yourself, and throw them to the proverbial wolves of trying to deal with a 99 point lots of nines uptime.
Yeah, no, spot on. And I'm not saying don't spend the money. I'm just saying,
right,
let's just think about doing, and it comes back to, again, I'm really sort of quoting her a lot. She was talking about, like, she engages with a customer, and they're like, what tool should I buy? I was like, well, maybe you don't need the tool. Maybe the tool is in the lunchroom and you need to get rid of him. But
that's true.
Anyways, let's see where we've killed this horse. Where do we want to go next?
No, we've killed this horse. And so, yeah, definitely spend your budget on Application Security Weekly sponsorships. We'll take, $1 million perhaps. But I think related to this, you have a Wired article, sloppy software patches are a disturbing trend. This also sounds something perhaps culture related. Tell us a bit more about this.
Yeah. So ZDI, the Zero Day Initiative, they've went through 17 years worth of data, I think close to 10,000 vulnerabilities, and sort of looking at how things are going. And in general, what they're seeing, there's a sentence at the end I really liked. Yeah. What they're seeing is the patches that we as an industry we as an industry, I'll call myself part of the software industry for right now. The patches which we're creating as vulnerabilities are found are becoming less and less quality. So that the quote here at the end was, the weaponization of failed patches in various vulnerabilities is absolutely being used in the wild right now. And we've seen this, on the show, I think in the last few weeks, even we've had stories where someone patched something, but it wasn't done right. And it's okay. Is it, again, back to, I guess I'm on a human kick today. Is it wasn't tested well enough? Did they not think about it? Were they in a rush? Did they not understand the vulnerability? So there's multiple different reasons why it could be that case, but we're basically in hell. I see this too, right? If I do something really quickly in a deadline, there's going to be bugs. So how do we slow down just enough to try and not make it obvious vulnerabilities from our vulnerabilities?
Yeah, and this is tying together. I'm going to bring in another Black Hat preview at the time article from Katie Musouris, who was talking about bug bounties, and I think there's a theme there too that ties in what you were saying, in the sense that she used the phrase bug bounty Botox. In other words, organizations just rolling out a bug bounty program to say, hey, we want to do good things. We want to engage the security community. We want to engage the worldwide security community that you were pointing out in that the MSRC article, which is all very positive things. But where it becomes slightly less positive, or a lot less positive, is you get sloppy software patches when you're trying to fix the bugs because you're just focused on the bugs themselves, or you just get a pile of bugs stacking up and up and up into what I like to call we have DevOps, we have DevSecOps, or we have bug ops programs. And a bug ops program is just like, we'll fix the bugs that come in, and we won't pay attention to the underlying attack class or the underlying why is this happening, or we're just going to measure our number of bugs that come in, but we're not going to pay attention to how efficiently and reliably, as a callback to Tanya was saying, can we roll out changes quickly because we have good testing. And this leads into that idea of mean time to repair, just being able to fix bugs efficiently. So I thought that was pretty nice. And then I'm going to I want to get your reaction to that, but also pull in the one other bug bounty article we've got about Google wanting to make the Linux kernel flaws harder to exploit, which is an example of using a bug bounty program to say we have some mitigations that we think are pretty effective. We're raising that attacker cost, another area that Tanya was talking about. And this is how we're going to use a bug bounty program to prove or disprove that hypothesis, meaning we're going to award a lot of money if you can bypass these Linux kernel, bypass these mitigations. And so clearly, if we're talking about Microsoft, we're talking about Google, these are organizations with deep pockets to spend on security, highly mature development programs within certain areas. I'm going to say that, just a small caveat before John rolls his eyes too much. But those are the areas to reach for with bug bounty programs. But obviously, small businesses, new programs aren't going to be testing broad mitigations. But I'm highlighting those as a roadmap, so we have a strategy for where to get to.
Excellent. Love to have a roadmap. Yeah, the Katie bit, I want to go back and actually watch the video on that, because I'm guessing that's going to be a good talk. And I think we were talking in the last week or two about, I think you actually asked me what metrics would I care about in an AppSec program, and that's sort of okay. MTTR is really great for some things on the ops side. Like if I've got a server down back in the day when we cared about individual servers, MTTR I care about, right? MTTR on a vulnerability. I mean, you go care about or on I'll say on an issue, right? It could be a vulnerability, it could just be a bug. You care about that sometimes, but you have to be able to take that step back and go, is this actually fixed? It's another analogy to throw in there is it's sort of like a bug soccer or a football, depending on what country you're in, because you're kicking the can down the road. And I'm sitting here rolling my eyes, not at the story, but I'm trying to think. So I didn't want to talk to you about this on air. And I've been seeing other people. I was on ASW last week as a co-host. But I think it was on there that there was another story we were talking about where I think it was there. It might have just been in the news, but there's some group out there right now that they're going to decrease the amount of money they're paying on bug bounties unless they actually also show a vulnerability has been actually exploited. Is that on here? 2 minutes. 2 minutes is going on.
Oh, interesting. No, yeah.
So if I find it, I'll track it down, put it into Discord later, but or maybe in our show notes. But yeah, so there's someone out there right now is going. That's great that you're giving us vulnerability findings, but like if I can't actually exploit it, then that's going to get decreased in priority because it's not as important to us. So yeah, it's the CTF is part of that. CTF has always had a bit of a, it's exploit based, right? So that's a little different. But it's good to see some of this going into some of these core pieces like the Linux kernel. Not sure my thought around that. I'm trying to think like where else would I want to see that? Where else would you want to see a program like this that actually has this level of focus? Other operating systems or maybe browsers, or where would you want to see something like this?
Browsers would be a big one for me. And this one thing I'll add before we totally exhaust the bounty side of things is I always do like to come back to the idea of this is the money spent on bounty awards for the researchers who found things. But I'd love to see what Microsoft spent to fix all of those bugs. For example, was it another 14 million on their developer time to fix all those bugs? Was it more than that, less than that? Because that's also, I think, can be informative in terms of where should we be focusing. And we saw, 1 or 2 months ago, we covered the Open Source Security Foundation, their investments into securing open source ecosystem, and that had some money behind it. And they were refactoring, rewriting into Rust, I believe, three or so core tools that everyone uses, basically saying these are potentially could potentially have vulnerabilities. We want to make sure they don't have any memory safety issues. Not necessarily so, and that's a specific trade-off, not necessarily the trade-off everyone would make, but it's showing where to invest the money. I think that's where my mind is going here. But before my mind gets too flayed from mind flares and all this thinking, there's some other stuff that we can dive into vulnerability-wise. That's some articles that you were also they were appealing to you on some deep hardware architecture, some chip architecture, John.
Yeah, we got a pair. It's funny. The second one actually has a cartoon in it, basically relating back to the first. So Intel and AMD are two big stalwarts from the last 2-3 decades. Intel has SGX. AMD has wow, actually don't remember what they call it on there. It's right off the top of my head. But anyways, they both have issues, and I guess these aren't directly related to each other. So on the Intel one, it is with SGX, and someone's found yet again a vulnerability that allows you to. So let's go back. SGX on Intel used for doing secure compute. In theory, it gives you a protected environment so that at a hardware level, so that what's happening on your application cannot be read by other processes, that type of thing, right? Encrypted memory and such. It's a suite of security components, which are a little better done than my ability to speak right now. But so it's this collection of things which we've seen a few issues with over the years, right? A lot of us had concerns about this being a black box on the CPU because we couldn't actually do the research on it. They released the code to a degree in the last year or so. I don't think this is related to that, but someone's once again found that they were able to get the encryption keys off the SGX. And if you get the encryption keys, then you're able to get in and see what's going on. But apparently there's not a ton of detail in here, or not as much detail as I would like. They have gone out to, Intel's gone out to a few people who really care about this. Like the example up front in the article is Signal, the secure messaging platform who uses SGX in their on the cloud side. And Signal is saying that they've gone through and they've tested and it's not going to be a problem for them. But in certain cases, it's what we're seeing longer and longer, as I'll switch over to AMD article, is if you really care about your compute and the security thereof, you can't do it on a shared platform. We've sort of known that. Like the vendors are trying to make this better, but nonetheless. On the AMD side, the whole family of Zen CPUs are vulnerable to a side channel attack, which is being called SQUIP, which I had in here stands for... Oh, come on, John.
The scheduler queue
Thank
usage
you.
via interference probing.
Exactly. So again, right? This one is shorter still, but this is one that had the cartoon talking about like, hey, did you hear Intel's having a bad day and it's not as bad as AMD's about to have? Because this one isn't just specific to the SGX itself; it's on the compute as a whole. You're not so much focusing on the secure compute, but compute in general on the AMD chips. And again, what this one comes down to is a side channel attack, which is resulting out of any modern CPU. Can I say for the last 20 years? I think so. Does some form of super processing or parallel processing that's basically you can speed up your CPU either by faster clock rate, changing your instruction set, or having that CPU try and do multiple things at once, right? So you pipeline your instruction set going into it. The chips have a bunch of code trying to go, which way do we think it's actually going to go? And they'll execute several things at once in some of these cases, and then just use the value which turns out to be where the if path went. And in this case, someone else has found. We've seen a few of these actually in recent weeks. Basically a prediction issue, but in this particular case, there's a side channel result out of that. And once again, as I said, it's not great. So that's interesting at the bottom of it. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, we're going to have to include a new vulnerability rating system that goes on the Kinsella rating system that basically is just not great. I'm not sure if there are other categories in there. We'll have to we'll have to see if there's anything else. But as you're describing that, it does have a good tie back to our conversation with Tanya and the good versus perfect. And here I would use the example of the discussion of, if you've just listened to John helpfully explain what these issues are in Intel and AMD, and now your high priority are figuring out, are we protected from side channel attacks, Spectre attacks, Epic attacks? Maybe your first question should be, are we handling our OAuth tokens on our API correctly?
Yes.
Are we encrypting data at rest and data in transit? Are we enabling like TLS 1.2 only, 1.2 and 1.3? These are the good questions to start with before becoming perfect security, because not everyone is that multi-tenant hosting provider like Amazon and Azure and so on.
And that's spot on. And that's why I labeled these with the Kinsella rating of not great, because they're super important, super really nitty gritty, cool things to go check out. I had another article which I didn't put in of some guy has put a probe onto an Ethernet switch, connected it to an oscilloscope. Took up this on Hackaday for those out there who are bored. He dumped a bunch of data into the oscilloscope, which he didn't have Ethernet decoding capabilities. Then he wrote some Python code and brought it over to Wireshark and was able to actually take, so basically recreated the Ethernet stack, right? But that's not who, as you said, have you done input validation? It's the basic things. It's like, let's start there. I'm like, okay, if that's cool, because again, as we've been saying, I'm not going to go and pull out my big expensive guns to shoot something down when the plane doesn't have gas to get off the ground.
And one of the things too, that can, in the spirit of what can we do simply, you also just had a very brief article about Dependabot on looking at vulnerable GitHub actions as well. So this is something that the headline kind of says it all.
Yep.
But I think the value comes out of, oh, nice, we actually have more inspection, more security visibility into additional parts of our CI/CD process. So to me, this is what's the opposite of not great? Is that just great? There's got to be something more entertaining.
Pretty good.
I think on the Kinsella scale here. Pretty good. Okay, thank you.
And yeah, this one is pretty good. This was I saw this one in the news a lot last week. I wasn't going to include it, and I figured, hey, let's throw it in. And like you said, it is sort of in the headline. And I think what we're seeing, this is, let's back up a month or so. We started seeing some vulnerabilities come out of the GitHub Actions. Whereas is one of our sort of things we talked about on the show here, at least I think I have a few times, is at some point people are going to start looking at, as your code becomes better, or your infrastructure becomes better, people go keep finding that weakest link, and they start looking at like the actual CI/CD path itself. So with GitHub, for those who don't know, you're able to go and point and click off basically a marketplace and say, hey, I'd love to have that scanner as part of my my CI process, and it sort of drops it in there. But there was no real security. There was security on it, right? But there was no way to do a notification of like, oh, dude, that thing you added in 6 months ago that you thought was sort of cool for a line count and pretty colors, that's got a vulnerability in it. So that's really what this is at the end of the day. It is simple, but it is very, very, very useful for those of us who are depending upon those.
No, absolutely. I've got now, we've mentioned a couple of black hat topics so far, and I have to admit, I have not had time yet to read through all of the presentations, check out the slides that are available. I will use this moment, though, to say to listeners, are there particular presentations that you really thought were interesting, entertaining, or educational that you'd love us to amplify here? Let us know. As well as I've got one that I think we can squeeze in to talk about a little bit here from Portswigger, talking about desync attacks. But before we dive into that, John, I'm not sure, are there some others some presentations that you want to put on the radar, maybe for some homework for listeners to take a look at as we start to cover them for the rest of the August and possibly even in September?
Honestly, the one that I think we were waiting for the last few weeks was the Katie one. So around Botox for your bounties. There's so much in there. Yeah, this is and I say this every year, but now I need to go and sort of try and dig through all these. So we'll have some really great stories, I think, in the coming weeks. And once again, I'll repeat what Mike said, is if any of you out there see something sort of cool, what you think is like, wow, I'd love to hear you guys talk about this, or just get this more exposure, hit us up in Discord, Twitter, Cloud Smoke, Flares, whatever you got. We'd love to hear about it.
So one of the ones that we can talk about a little bit now, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to squeeze this in since we're near the end, is Desync, which is Portswigger once again diving into HTTP request smuggling. I'm prefacing this in the sense of I heard I can't find the quote, but I heard someone say a long time ago that if you want to win a Nobel Prize in physics, figure out how to measure something accurately.
Mm.
And I think there's an equivalent here. If you want to become famous or make lots of money in bug bounties, find a new attack surface. And from 2019 onward, Portswigger has definitely discovered this HTTP request smuggling attack surface, and identified lots of really interesting and clever and relatively simple vulns once you read how they are executed. They boil down to the sense of HTTP1 has a standard-ish description to it, meaning, it has some RFCs, and it basically says, here are a bunch of request content that can come into discrete requests and be queued up by a server. But if you can play around with the data length boundaries, basically the content length and the transfer encoding that both say where a particular request content ends, you can get some mismatched assumptions between the HTTP traffic coming in and whatever that HTTP traffic handler is looking at. And that traffic handler could be a reverse proxy, it could be a server, and he lists Varnish, Apache, a bunch of others, and demonstrates how these vulnerabilities come through implementation details and implementation mismatches from HTTP1 that affects really entertaining things. It affected Amazon. So once again, here's a company with a deep bug bounty pockets and mature secure programming, but still falling vulnerable to this, showing some, as he admits, admittedly quite rare, but a way to use a reverse proxy to basically create a couple multiple requests to get access to an intranet site, which I thought was very much like, what? Type of reaction there. So a lot of really interesting. It's a great article. I'm not doing it justice to try to summarize it here, but one of the takeaways I think, though, is that use HTTP2, or I think now HTTP3. And part of the reason is that HTTP2 is much more strict and much more prescriptive about how to consume data. And because of that prescriptive aspect and what more well-defined approach is that you can have implementations that are hopefully more in pretty good land as opposed to not so great. So that's how I'd measure the HTTP1 to HTTP2 journey. I don't know, John, if you've had a chance to read through Portswigger's research here. Anything else that highlights from you?
I did. Man, it feels like I can't believe this was just last week. It feels like I was reading this weeks ago.
Indeed.
Let me think. You know what? Especially as you're just sort of talking through the thought that pops in my head around this is where does this sit in the zero trust world? From the point of view, and I guess you could also say in single sign-on as well, but particularly zero trust. So zero trusts, I've been talking about a lot. It's not that I'm actually that fond of it. It's just it's on my mind. But the concept of we're going to have a central authentication. I'm not going to worry too much about the transport aspect of security of my network. I might use a VPN, I might not. But I'm going to use that authentication and the way I authorize someone, the combination of where they are, what their machine's like, color of their hair, a bunch of different aspects to figure out if they should or should not be able to get access to the property. How does that concept, which is relatively new, some people, it's again, I was on the ASW last week, and boy, I hit a sensitive topic when I brought up zero trust. Like I got two people yelling at me. But to some folks, it is sort of tricky and sketchy, and like there's nothing zero about it, and blah blah blah. I get it, cool, but still, it's something that they're being used. So bringing it back to this, would this? I'm guessing this is going to decrease the security of a zero trust implementation, because you're not. Again, it depends on the level of that security of the transport. But it seems like this is going to play with that. So it's very far reaching when something like this comes out, right? And it's, as always, it's a good write up from these guys. Lots of good stuff in it. But I'd be curious to think about how far does it spread? We talk about HTTP2. How long till that's really adopted? And it's getting adoption right now. Don't get me wrong again. But I think we still got a little bit of time. So as people have some stuff like this in their back pocket, it'll be fun, over a tasty beverage to go and poke around at things and sort of see what happens. And I'm trying to think of what my security rating is for this, but I'll save that for later.
All right. Well, while you think of the security rating, I think what I'll do is have one more comment to bring all of our conversations together now. I'm nodding and smiling and sighing, unfortunately, that yes, HTTP 2 has been available for quite a while, but the pervasiveness is perhaps not so great. In HTTP 3, where we might just leapfrog straight to that, even though that as a standard, it's only officially standardized this summer. But maybe part of that, how much money do we have left? Our $5 million security budget is that idea of what if we just went through our organization and turned all of our HTTP 1 endpoints into HTTP 2. There's clearly a lift. And it's one of those things that's engineering, a VP of engineering might say, actually, why am I going to bother? And hopefully we can build a case on there's some performance characteristics that are improvements here. You can have better, lower latency. So there's, always speak to those SRE types of categories. But here's hopefully a way to help build the security value as well by saying we can avoid just some unknown mismatches, some messiness, if you will, some things that are not so great on the back end because of this legacy HTTP 1.1 that goes back to those of us who were in college or high school in the 90s.
And that's a very great point. But subtle in there of like when we're trying to push these things in, it's not always about, hey, we've got a way to make things more secure and you won't be on the front page of New York Times. That's great when it works, but it's a much easier sell to go to a lot of people and go, hey, this is going to improve the performance of our website by X%.
Yeah.
And Google has shown us that if we're able to get a faster response on that, we're going to get better return on our e-commerce. We'll have more sales and bigger sales and all those type of things. So yeah, always think about how do you sell these things to people, right? Very important.
Well, the other important thing to sell to people is having a good Kinsella scale of security impacts. So we will be expanding on that over the upcoming episodes. Thank you once again, John, for giving us more excellent insights on the articles as well as how to talk about them. I want to thank all of our listeners. Please do subscribe, hit that like button, check out the show notes. And speaking of 90s music, check out Soul Asylum and their song Runaway Train. We'll see you next week on Application Security Weekly.